So yeah, my name is Hudson. I am currently a senior product manager at Walmart Labs in San Bruno and Sunnyvale. Does anybody use the Walmart app or the Walmart.com website, or just Amazon in here? Okay. All right. So I own the pharmacy health and wellness experience, and so basically that's cross-platform, so iOS, Android, and responsive web. So it allows people to manage their refills. Do refills to the store, do competitive transfers, medical expense summaries, and things like that. And so happy to answer any questions more specifically about that afterwards. But tonight I thought it would be cool to kind of walk through my approach in thinking about like how to create a product roadmap, what considerations I kind of pull in, stakeholders to align with, and things along those lines. And so it's going to be more generic than just Walmart here. So basically, the first thing is like, a roadmap is kind of a compilation of all of the ideas that would go into future iterations of the product, right? And so where do those ideas come from? I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I've heard in the Valley is that like the product manager is responsible for coming up with all of the ideas and all of the solutions to all of the problems, and that if there is a solution to be found within the product manager should kind of like work to find that. In fact, that's partly true, but really, the good ideas will come from all over the place. They'll come from your customers. Every day I get into work, I get a constant feed of customer feedback. So within the app and within the website, we have kind of a built-in feedback mechanism for customers to write in, tell us what they really love about the experience and what they don't love so much about the experience. Most of the time it's what they don't love. But oftentimes you'll hear some ideas like, oh, it'd be really cool if you guys did this. So certainly the customer is a very, very valuable source of ideas and feedback for how the product is. Engineers also will come with their ideas. Particularly as you're going through product specs for a certain initiative, the engineer may bring to light certain technical aspects that you may not have immediately thought of and say, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we incorporated this piece of technology into this design? So that's part of it as well. Marketing, sales and marketing, obviously there's no closer place to the customer than sales and marketing. And so they'll certainly bring back, and obviously it depends on the business model, but they'll bring back a lot of key customer insights that you as a product manager or as an engineer wouldn't have. And even, could be just Sally from Starbucks. If you talk to anybody about what you do when you're out and about, they will always have ideas for you, what you should do with your product or where you should take your product. So there's never a shortage of ideas. I think, the important job of a product manager is really not to come up with the ideas, but it's to say no. And it's really kind of to understand which ideas are most valuable to pursue, if that makes sense. And so, in a lot of ways, the product manager is kind of the gatekeeper. There's a lot of ideas, a lot of noise that is going to be floating around, and it's the product manager's job to understand the core value of the product, where they want to take the product, what their vision is, and how the different ideas that they hear or that are being tossed around align with that core value and align with the vision of the product. And it's not always obvious, and it's definitely not always obvious, particularly if you've got a short-term win that could potentially acquire a lot of customers, but might not align perfectly with a long-term strategic direction. So some balances there. Any questions so far? I know that we have some Q&A session at the end, but I also want to encourage people to ask questions as we go along here, because sometimes it just flows better if you're asking questions about a certain subject that we're talking about. So does anybody have any questions so far about anything? Don't be afraid at all.
How do you validate the ideas?
We're going to talk a little bit more about that for sure. It's a great question. How do you validate and think about the ideas? Yeah. 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 Yes. Good question also. Let's talk about that on the alignment area. So let me move forward a little bit. Here, I'm sorry, there was another hand too. Yeah.
How do you find the ideas, so many ideas that have come to you?
How do you filter? Good question. Let's talk about that. We'll talk about that in a couple slides. So, the product roadmap, as I said, is kind of an outline of all of your different ideas that come into play when you're talking about building a roadmap. And so, a product roadmap should do a few different things. For starters, it should reflect your product vision. It should tell the story about where your product is right now and where you want to get to, how you're getting there. Second, it should be a communication device. I don't think there's many documents or tools that I refer to more often internally than the product roadmap. And I'll talk to you more about why that is as we go through this presentation, but it's such a powerful communication tool as you socialize the vision of the product internally. Should be very simple. No one reads a product roadmap that's difficult to understand. I've seen product roadmaps that are super difficult to understand. I don't read them. And certainly as you work to socialize your product roadmap up to the stakeholders and leaders, they don't have time to learn about how you may be representing different initiatives either. And so stay consistent with a simple, practical manner. And it should be the source of truth. We'll talk more about this, but once you have alignment on the priorities, once you kind of come together and understand this is the goal, this is the direction that we want to take the product, that should be the source of truth. And it actually will prevent a lot of unnecessary priority and alignment meetings through the year if you're able to solidify and come together around that from the start. Lastly, delivery dates is always kind of an interesting subject. Or not. I mean, it's basically kind of up to you. I think it depends on how detailed you want your roadmap to be. And also I think it depends on the audience, who you're kind of talking about the roadmap with. So for instance, developers oftentimes want to know roughly what delivery dates you have in mind for certain features. Whereas, if you're talking to marketing maybe, or somebody more outside of the development zone, maybe the exact delivery dates aren't as important. But certainly want to think about how you want to bring delivery dates in, whether it be a week, a month, or a quarter. I've seen all pretty effective for roadmaps. So what inputs and considerations should you kind of be thinking about here? I think when building a roadmap, you kind of want to start with the problem and develop the solution around the problem. And I do start with the problem there because I've seen starting with the solution is very dangerous for product managers. I've seen situations where product managers get so anchored to a solution, or other people get really anchored to a solution that they really kind of forget about what it is they're solving for. And so I think as a product manager, it's really important to understand what problem you're solving for, and it doesn't have to be a problem with the product. You know what I mean? It's a problem that the product is solving, but the problem doesn't have to be within the product. Okay, so it could be a problem that your customers are facing that you want to improve the product in this way to solve for. Important distinction there, but understanding kind of what it is that the product is solving. And what benefits there are that are being derived from the product. I think that in addition to that, every product will have like a set of goals or OKRs, objectives and key results, that should also tie back to a higher level mission of the company. And that's important as well because if your solution doesn't have clear goals that tie back to a higher level mission of the company, then really you might be distracted from what the core values of the product are. And so you want to make sure that they all map back correctly. And a product may have 3 or 4 or 5 multiple goals and objectives that all tie back into the mission of the company. Take a look at a company like Facebook, right? Whose mission is to connect the world, make it more open. Got a lot of products within the Facebook platform that support that mission. And each one of those products have a set of OKRs that map perfectly into that mission, right? And so that's kind of how you want to think about the solutions that you're putting in and building into your roadmap for your particular product to solve a particular problem and an opportunity. Does that make sense? Any questions so far? Yeah.
Can you give an example of like these 4 things within a context of a problem of a product you've worked with in Walmart?
Yeah. So for Walmart, I'll talk about the pharmacy health and wellness experience. Walmart's mission as a company is to kind of provide an everyday low price so that consumers can save more and live better. And in doing so, I have a set of products that I manage to help with that, to help fulfill that mission statement, right? And so for me, one of those products might be a medication item page. So providing information that a customer can arrive at a Tylenol, or not a Tylenol, any medication RX item page, and understand, read some more details about the medication and understand what price that they'll be paying for, if it's a $4 prescription, for instance, or not. And that'll be maybe the objective and goal there, is to expose the price transparency, expose how we're delivering medication to the customer at a lower price than a Walgreens or a CVS. The problem that I'm solving for is customers are unsure what prices for prescriptions they would pay at Walmart. The solution being the RX item page. The goals and objectives to increase price transparency, and that feeds into Walmart's everyday low price mission and thing that they're trying to solve.
Thank you.
Okay, so now the question is, you kind of know what a roadmap does, you know what considerations to kind of bring in when building a roadmap. Now, how do I actually build it? And there's a lot of people, a lot of product managers out there that, like I said, they kind of take it upon themselves to think of all of the solutions and to prioritize all of the solutions, and then socialize it, and then get alignment across the organization. That could work. That hasn't really worked best for me. What really works well for me is to kick things off by having kind of collaborative road mapping sessions with your stakeholders. And so, understanding that, you may have stakeholders from engineering, stakeholders from sales and marketing, stakeholders from the business strategy team, all stakeholders in Walmart's case from the store side as well as the .com side. So understanding you've got a lot of stakeholders here that your roadmap will impact. Let's bring them in when you're kind of in the ideation and formulation stage of the roadmap, so that it's kind of like a team effort. And even with your vision, it's a lot easier to get buy-in early on as opposed to kind of having more of a dictatorial, this is the roadmap, let's get behind it after the fact. And so get consensus, understand like what the main goals and objectives are. And make sure those are aligned, because if the main goals and objectives are not aligned, you're going to have trouble aligning on the solutions and, to the problems that feed that. So make sure that that's aligned on. And as I said, and get those stakeholders engaged early. You do want to foster a healthy team debate. If you're going to have a debate, this is the time to have it. You don't want to have it mid-development. So have it up front, and trust me, more often than not, you're going to be dealing with reasonable people, and reasonable people tend to, be open-minded about, what it is that the other person is saying and why they might be saying that. And so listen to them. And I think having a healthy team debate is all part of tossing out ideas, tossing out solutions for problems. Next, you're going to have a lot of ideas with this collaborative session. Start big and narrow down the ideas. What you'll see when you get a lot of ideas out there is that you'll start to see themes pop up for the ideas. For instance, the medication item pages, right? You'll one of the themes is kind of creating a knowledge portal of medication information, so that customers see Walmart.com as kind of a center of knowledge for healthcare. An RX item page would fit into that theme perfectly, right? And you'll start to see that. You'll start to see these solutions feed into broader themes really well. And those broader themes, honestly, if you can map those solutions back into those broader themes, it really kind of gives you the answer as to why you're doing something. Again, for internal socialization and priority challenges, it really kind of helps you tell the story that you want to tell as the product manager. Yeah.
In terms of being all the stakeholders together, so you have your internal stakeholders, it's a representative from all the different departments within the organization, you have developers, you have your product managers and POs. When those sessions take place at these kickoffs, is it a good idea to bring representatives from some of the companies that are maybe making those requests? Because sometimes I find there's a miscommunication between what the customer wants and the people that are feeding that over to the product management team. So I don't know if it's,
Yeah.
is that ever recommended?
So you're referencing mostly like a business to business model.
Right.
Yeah. I think that I'm hesitant to. I think that there's always exceptions, but generally speaking, when you're talking about building a product roadmap and prioritizing features, I think it's always dangerous to bring customers into that process. I think that the most important job is to bring customer feedback into that process and aligning as a company internally on what is a priority. You know what I mean? Taking into consideration that feedback. You never want to feel like you're favoring certain customers and things like that. And so I think it's dangerous to bring customers into too early before achieving internal alignment. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering for the session, feedback session kind of for the beginning with stakeholders, what kind of process do you use that keeps it open enough but focused enough? Like, do you start with either the problems you're trying to solve that like back to our company's goals, and then have like what's the kind of talk a little more about?
Yeah, good question. So the question is, when you're having kind of an open collaborative session, how do you keep the focus, really? And I think when everybody may have coming from different vantage points, may have different ideas as to what the themes or problems are, how do you kind of focus in on what the core themes should be? And for me, I think it's always important, first of all, as a product manager, to have a point of view on as to where the product is going and what your vision is of the product. And so more than anybody else, you should really understand what the core value of the product is. All right. And so for me, the product manager would set the context for this meeting and say, this is what I'm thinking right now. These are the main goals and objectives that we want to accomplish in 2018. These are the themes that would kind of help us get there, and these are the solutions kind of that are going to help complete those themes and deliver on those themes. People aren't going to always agree out of the gate, but I think at least you're kind of setting the framework for them to either weigh in positively or negatively or add additional insight to it. But I don't want you to see collaborative road mapping sessions as kind of a free-for-all and everybody tossing in ideas. I think it's very important that the product manager sets the context for everybody, comes in with a point of view, and is open to feedback from the other people at the session. But it's definitely a dance. It's definitely a dance, not a science. Any other questions? That was a good question. Yeah.
How often do you have this session? Like every quarter, once a year?
Yeah. Another good question is, how often do you really want to have these sessions? And I think it depends on the industry, how dynamic the industry is. But for us, I typically would have this session annually. to set an annual context and kind of like lay out an annual roadmap. And so understanding that this is what we want to accomplish over the course of the year. How do we go about doing that? And then from there, once you're able to kind of align at a high level, you can then be able to, and you can begin to prioritize initiatives by quarter, and break down those deliveries and initiatives into different quarter deliveries. And we can talk more, you'll see more about that. But you don't want to do this too often, because this is almost like a reset. You know what I mean? I mean, every time you bring people to the table and say, this is what we're thinking, you kind of want to stay focused on what you set out to do at the beginning of the year. And I think it's important not to do it too frequently, but also not wait too long. So it would depend on the team, but I do it once a year. Okay, great questions so far. So, all right, so this is always a fun process. So, you have your list of ideas. Let's say you've got 10 different solutions tossed around that feed into 2 or 3 different themes. How do you go then and prioritize those ideas and those deliverables, features, to the customer? And so what works for me is kind of just a benefit effort matrix, where you can kind of lay out and estimate what the benefit is against the effort. And I think what I forgot to mention on the last slide was kind of the last thing you want to do once you prioritize your features. You want to work with your developers and certainly your tech lead to understand what is the technical effort or technical complexity to deliver this feature. Until you kind of, and it doesn't need to be a lot of work. I think for me, at this point of the game, you're often doing like a t-shirt sizing sort of approach. So small, medium, large, extra large sort of effort. You don't want the developers to spend a lot of time doing this effort, because if they're sizing up effort, they're not coding. And so it's a balance there as well. But at this stage, when you've got, say, a list of, let's say, 10 different features, you also want to have a rough idea, after partnering with your tech lead, a rough idea for what sort of effort would be required to deliver each of those 10 features. All right? And then you can begin looking at this benefit effort matrix and understanding how those different features may plot against this matrix. And so you may have 1 over there, 2 down there, not a lot of benefit, but really high effort for engineers to deliver. Another third one, even more effort with about the same value. And you can just kind of get an idea for, let's say you got seven initiatives now plotted. So looking at this, what would be kind of a couple, 2 of the biggest opportunities here, do you think, right?
1 and 4.
1 and 4 looks pretty good, right? Not a huge effort, very high customer benefit. And yeah, that's exactly right. I think, and you won't be able to plot this without first understanding what the customer value of the feature is, and also understanding what the level of technical effort is to bring that feature to life. So you need both of those things to really plot that. Yeah. Yeah. Great question. Great question. So benefit question is, how do you kind of look at benefit, given that benefit could mean a lot of different things. And you're exactly right. So there could be customer benefit, or there could also be like business benefit. Not always the same thing. For instance, bringing on new customers is a huge benefit to the business, but not a huge benefit necessarily to the current customer base, if that makes sense. And so understanding kind of like, how you're defining benefit. And I think, to be fair to the question, benefit may be different for different features. If you're talking about a growth-oriented feature, the benefit may be we could probably acquire a lot of customers by bringing this to market. If you're talking about a core feature, for instance, in the pharmacy, health, and wellness, a feature that allows parents to link their children to their Walmart.com accounts to manage their children's pharmacy refills isn't necessarily going to generate a lot of new accounts, but it will benefit that customer a lot because now they're able to manage their entire family's prescriptions from their one account, if that makes sense. Yep.
That's an awesome customer experience example. Do you ever monetize that?
Monetize? Well, yeah, and I think that's part of what goes into the business value. So you're looking at benefit in terms of customer value, business value, and all of that feeds into where those features would be ranked on this axis. I think you're exactly right. And you're kind of balancing that with the engineering effort. Yeah, I think that's right on. So what you'll see here is there's like a low effort zone there, which is almost like a quick win. And in an agile environment, agile methodology, which a lot of companies here are, Walmart's a 2-week sprint cadence. This to me would mean we could probably knock this out in 1 sprint and just get it to market. Yeah.
So I have a question about that. So I've seen this trend in companies where you have the lead for a development team as well as a PO, and they start getting into those sizing sessions, and they're putting extra large, medium, and small, and that's what they're committing to on the roadmap, which translates somehow into days that it's going to deliver. But you don't really know until you start breaking those components and stories down to the development team. You might find that that's going to be a larger effort, or you might find it's a smaller effort. By that time, the team's already committed to that.
Yeah.
So I find that it's difficult when you, and I don't know a way around this, but how do you get development involved so you get some better sizing around some of those efforts so that the product owner and the lead developer isn't committing the teams to something that isn't realistic in terms of deliverables?
Great question. So the question is, if you're doing sort of a high-level T-shirt sizing sort of level of effort exercise, there are some things that are going to be missed. And to what extent do you want to have accountability, or to what extent can you kind of design for almost or plan for certain things being missed like that? And I mean, you're right on. I mean, I think that we're talking about there's kind of, when you're talking about level of effort, to me, there's kind of 2 stages. One is the initial T-shirt sizing stage that happens very early on. And then as you get closer to actually developing the product, that's when also from a product manager standpoint, you're drilling down into what the product specs will be and what the true product requirements are going to be with this deliverable. Certain sets of acceptance criteria might not have been communicated before. Product requirements may not have been communicated in the level of detail that you will have right before you start, building. And so then there's that second layer of assessment that the engineers would then come back with once they have had a chance to look at that level of detail. That I think that's pretty standard. And so hopefully it doesn't kind of like straddle the medium and then get into the extra large. When that kind of second pass happens, I think that sometimes it could go from medium to large or from large to medium. When you're talking about a lot of projects, hopefully that balances out so that you're able to deliver about what you set out to do at the beginning of the year. But it doesn't always happen that way, and I think that it's part of the product manager's job to be able to plan and adapt as technical challenges become more complex than originally thought.
So in that, do you find instead of picking these large T-shirt sizes, it's helpful to maybe look at the team's average velocity and give it a very high-level estimation where you can divide that in and figure out how many sprints it might take?
Well, yeah, I think that the team's velocity is super important. That's going to play, though, more into the detailed estimations. I think what happens more, it's not necessarily not knowing the velocity. What it is the engineers diving in a little bit deeper and saying, oh, we actually didn't realize this would be required to deliver this. We thought that we could maybe use a common component. Turns out we're going to have to customize this, and it's going to take a little bit longer. Things like that will add scope, but I think that it's important to set those requirements before development happens. Certainly, you don't want scope creep to happen mid-development. I think it's important to happen before it starts, and sometimes you will adjust your delivery estimates based on that. I think that's okay, though. Yeah.
So for the things that you highlight in your, for example, in this matrix here, do you also expose at times like technology enablers that allow certain requirements to be delivered? Which isn't necessarily a functional requirement, but something that enables, and sometimes it might be common to like 2 or 3 other things. Do you expose that on the roadmap as well?
Yeah. So are you basically referencing sort of like back-end service layer work that would facilitate? Yeah.
It entails a large amount of work, but it entails a lot of other requirements down the road.
Yep. I think you absolutely do. I mean, basically anything that is going to require bandwidth from your developing team needs to be on the roadmap. And it's not just for you, but it's for visibility so that people know what your team is working on, and they know what's coming down. But you're right. There are a lot of things that the engineers will work on that customers don't see. But that does need to be called out. So as soon as you kind of like, have this scatter plot, you can then also understand where you might want to focus your time on here. And as you can see, kind of, you got not just a quick win section, but you really kind of will see this clear area of let's do it. Like these are initiatives that offer a huge value to either the business or the customer, and when plotted against the level of effort that the engineers came back with, it's obvious. Let's go ahead and do it. And at that point, then you're just talking about, okay, when do we want to do it and how soon? Yeah, question.
Following up on the benefit question, that if something is high value for customers versus business, or it's one feature can be growth feature, one feature could be like stability, etc. And each of the business unit think, oh, of course it's high value for us.
Yep.
But how do you assess, like from the company level, which one is higher benefit?
So you're saying the benefit touches one area of the company, but doesn't extend up to maybe the higher mission of the
business unit has its own goals.
Yeah.
Right? Like high value for this business unit A is different.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. That's a good question. Not all of the benefits will transfer to other areas of the company. Certain benefits are going to be kind of more isolated, and to the extent that key stakeholders are impacted. So, for instance, let's say Initiative 4 here doesn't have anything to do with bringing on new customers. Marketing is sitting here saying, look, I'm measured against how many new customers I can bring on board. So marketing doesn't really want to do number 4 a lot. They might want to do number 7, which let's suppose that's like to support a growth campaign or an onboarding funnel. It's a balance. It's a discussion with those stakeholders that aren't necessarily going to be benefiting from different features. Ultimately, and it depends on your organization, but ultimately this is a conversation that needs to happen with product, business, strategy, and aligned on from the start. Usually product is the owner of the vision. And so product should have a strong point of view, but it's you never want to feel like you're shutting anybody out, for sure. Does that answer the question?
I think to a certain extent, it's like how do you measure? I would think the median for a median benefit for A and median business for B, it could be a high benefit for the company. Like on the scale, how do you actually map them up on an absolute scale?
Are you weighting them, the value to different business sectors? Or?
Oh, okay.
We can explain with an example.
Yeah.
Say, I'm asking you, it's like, say 4 is important for the sales team, and 6 is important for the marketing team, and there's a debate.
Yeah.
Both the teams think that it's high impact for them.
Yeah.
As a PM,
Yeah.
how would you kind of settle that debate?
I think if that's the question, and you've got different stakeholders vying for different initiatives because they both bring unique value to that group, then that's a debate. You have a conversation about how those initiatives map back to the OKRs, so the objectives and key results that you want to deliver for that year, and if you know. And then also, as I said before, how they also map back to the broader, higher level mission of the company is also super important as well. Hopefully there are themes that have kind of a priority distinction between the other themes. And if four maps back to a higher priority theme than 7, I think that's kind of how you make those judgment calls. But you can't always make everybody happy with every roadmap decision. And so there are going to be times where it's just a difficult decision to make.
So, like, some example of tactics, like in your past experience that you're taking.
So, yeah. So I think a fair example that I can give you. Well, let me wait until later in the presentation. We talk about conflict. We're talking about conflict right now. So after this, we'll have a couple conflicts slides, and those will be fun. I think everybody will like those. So with this prioritization, you'll also get some kind of area where it's like, why bother? This is not going to be worthwhile. It's a lot of work for the dev team, not a lot of benefit for the customer. And then there's this area in the middle where you'll see a lot of the discussion actually happening. And I think this is where more of the discussion between, okay, it's benefiting sales, it's not benefiting the core user or something like that. And that's where some of the debate might happen, particularly as you have something like 6 and 5 where both have 5 has like more benefit, but also more effort. You'll have a little bit more discussion around that. So before we get into the conflicts, which I say for last, we'll talk about different roadmap templates, and these are the different styles that I've seen used in the past, different levels of effectiveness. But the first kind of roadmap theme that I've seen, or template that I've seen, is kind of this laddered roadmap, which is kind of interesting. I don't understand it entirely. I mean, it goes, up, low to high, left to right, which is good. That's kind of what you want profits to do, and so it might be good for your product roadmap to do that. But other than that, there's like a lot of white space on there. I'm not exactly sure how. I think that there are more effective roadmaps that I've seen. For example, this one, I think I actually like this one a lot. I use this personally. I think a quarterly release roadmap shares the right level of detail across the company. And I think it's very easy to kind of like consume as a reader as well. And so you'll have all of your features listed out here and kind of like just, by quarter that it's delivered on. And you'll also see down here, the certainty and confidence will drop dramatically, like as you go through the year as well. And that needs to be understood within the organization too. Things that are slated for Q4 are not going to be as firm as things that are going to be delivered in Q1 if you're building this roadmap in December of the year before, right? And so things later in the year do tend to shift around. Priorities do tend to shift around. But within the next quarter or two, it should be pretty firm. And this is something also, yeah, and this is pretty easy to comprehend. Any questions on this template? I'm sorry?
Is your PI length a year? The PI length?
The
product increment to them? Do you have a product, like how often do you release?
So you release, this doesn't necessarily tie back directly to incremental product releases. And so for instance, at Walmart, we'll release every 2 weeks for the app, right? So within, a given quarter, we'll have several of those releases, right? We'll have six of those releases within a given quarter, but you don't necessarily need to tie it into one of those. You just tie it at a high level. What quarter are you coming down with? This also works very well for marketing as too, because, marketing, they're interested in what's coming down the pipe. They want to know what product releases they would potentially be developing marketing campaigns for to get the customers excited about the features. So they're going to want to know kind of on a quarterly basis, like how they're going to be allocating their time over the course of the year as well. And as you get into that quarter, then you can kind of get into specific dates and strategies and tactics. But at a high level, this works really well on an annual roadmap. Yeah.
So what if for some reason you decide this is a really good idea, it takes too much effort, let's test it out? How do you capture that if it's the same resources? Is that like a separate effort? Or I'm sure you do lots of testing at Walmart, you know, of different things. So how do you communicate testing and keep testing within a reasonable amount, right?
Okay.
Because that makes like different tests you might do that maybe require a lot of effort, but if you test it a different way, you can get a reasonable.
All right, so that's an interesting question. Are you basically talking about products that require a high level of effort with an unsure level of benefit, and you want to test them before? Okay.
Do you actually capture that like something like this?
Yeah. I think you would. I think whenever you're testing a product, you need to get the product to a stage of development that is worthy of being tested, right? And so that in and of itself is going to require some work. And, typically you might call those like, MVP test ready product releases. In which case, you'll test it. You'll always want to test and get early feedback on how it's doing. And you're right. If it's just not doing as well, then you don't want to throw, good bandwidth after a bad product. And so you might kill it. But you would want to absolutely call that plan out on the roadmap. Yeah.
I have a question. We can talk it for later when
Sure.
we talk about conflicts. So it looks like you've done an annual roadmap planning.
Yeah.
And say you are at the end of Q2 2016 and Amazon makes some splash on pharmacy space.
Yeah.
Now, say the BD team comes in and says, oh, we need to move things around.
Yeah.
Change the roadmap.
Yep.
So then conflict again.
Yep. So yeah, we can talk about that a little bit right now. Let me drink some water to get that one.
You repeat the question as well?
Mm-hmm. So the question is, let's suppose you're halfway through the year, you've laid out this roadmap, and due to competitive forces, let's say Amazon does something, leadership at Walmart wants to react. And that reaction is going to impact the roadmap. How do you kind of plan for that or incorporate that, right? And it's definitely, I think that it's hopefully doesn't happen too often. I think, to start with, to set some context, hopefully, like I said, leadership is aligned with the roadmap and the priorities and initiatives and solutions that are on the roadmap. All right. So they need to be aligned with that at the beginning of the year, or at least a few quarters in advance. If something comes down from leadership that says Amazon's doing this, we want to do this to react, they should have a fairly good understanding for what consequences there are going to be with the current roadmap that's in place. So there's always a trade-off. There's always sacrifices anytime you want to do that. I think that what it is at that point is it's a conversation of, okay, we can do that, but this is what it means. This means family account linking is going to get pushed back a quarter. This means the RX item pages are going to get pushed out 2 quarters. So it really kind of is an exercise in communicating the impacts, making sure that the impacts are clear. And hopefully you agree with it. If you disagree with it, that's another story. But hopefully you kind of agree with it and can have an open dialogue with them about it.
Where do you post this? Because
Yeah.
I can imagine you share with the team and then they forget about it a month
Yeah.
later. They keep
Yeah.
that vision there for them.
Yeah, so there are different kind of like collaborative tools that companies could use. We use like Confluence. There's also Jira, which which kind of talks to Confluence as well, both Atlassian. But so Jira and Confluence are both shared tools that are shared across teams internally. And so what I do is I typically would have like an open access Confluence page with this shared on it so that people can click the link. And the other good thing about that is if you do update it, obviously it would always be up to date. Yeah.
So how do you measure the data done into your roadmap?
I think that's a very high level of detail that might not be appropriate for all teams. I think that, and also it depends on how dynamically you want your roadmap updated. Usually it's updated on a quarterly basis. And so if you're marking a Jira epic, say, as done, it may or may not adjust the roadmap in real time. Like, you know what I mean? Maybe you'll... Right.
From a measurement and marketing purpose, that you take the epic, the Jira, and then check that roadmap, whatever we have reviewed upon for that quarter, is it done? Or there are some of the features we have pulled it back and then...
I think to answer your question, it's a good question. It's a good question. I think the answer is it depends on the level of detail, and it also depends on the size of the initiative, because there could be a lot of epics in Jira that feed a release. And just because one's done, it may not impact what you would show here, right? Because it's still in open development. And so I think it depends on the level of detail that you want to communicate, who you're talking to, and the size of the release. Yeah.
Something instead of a small hiccup or a road bump, like you explained, our competitive forces or something like that, something completely dynamically different. Let's say, for example, Walmart bought Jet.com, integrated to the e-commerce aspect. The earnings were amazing. The revenue growth was amazing quarter after quarter. And then all of a sudden, boom, revenue growth wasn't as expected. The growth decelerated, and the traction has been reduced significantly. And you guys are still planning on great. But at the same time, do you continue with your roadmap, or do you actually assess what went wrong? Maybe the roadmap you're taking is completely wrong because it's not delivering what it's supposed to be delivering.
Yep.
Because it like a fake out in a way, because it looked good and then it stopped.
Yeah.
So what do you do at that point? Do you reassess the roadmap? And the tricky part is some of the design solutions are complicated. That means you may have to go back and redo some of the architecture. I mean, how do you design for that, and how do you anticipate for that?
Yeah.
Or maybe, what are you guys doing right now after the earnings report, basically? How about that one?
That's an interesting hypothetical question.
Yes.
So the question was, let's suppose you build out a roadmap and with a certain level of expectations, of a certain level of performance expectations that come with that roadmap. And let's suppose you're going down the year and you hit a quarter that fails to deliver on those expectations. To what degree do you adjust? Right? I mean, that's kind of the genesis. And I think that I think you want to have metrics in place that are good indicators for whether your roadmap deliverables thus far have been successful or not. And if the indicators are telling you that they haven't been successful, then you may want to rethink building on top of those features, right? But at the end of the day, if you're talking about a company-wide reporting event that failed to deliver, you really have to take a close look at what features are driving that and what features aren't driving that. And so I think what I'm trying to say is not all roadmap features are going to drive profitability for the company. And if your vision of a product manager extends out a year or two, you really want to think hard before reacting and scrapping that vision because of a quarter or two of bad performance. If that's the case, if you're gonna react that quickly and be that sensitive, you probably didn't have a super strong vision for what you wanted to do with your product. And so I guess my feedback to that question is you can't be too quick to react. You want to have the metrics in place that give you indicators for what may be causing disappointing reporting, and dive in closer to that, but don't react too quickly and change a roadmap that has previously been aligned on, previously been prioritized. People thought this was a great idea 2 quarters ago, so it's unlikely that Now they don't. So you really got to think hard about reacting like that. Yeah.
I see in the future you've listed PI jobs as in culture. I'm curious to know what you meant by those two.
No, I didn't fill this in. Don't.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. Don't read that. Yeah.
You mentioned that this roadmap is updated quarterly. So, do you let all the stakeholders know then?
Yeah. Absolutely. You will absolutely talk to your stakeholders at least quarterly, probably weekly, maybe daily. And so your stakeholders should all be aware what's coming down. If you're not going to hit a release by a certain quarter and it's going to move to the next quarter, you want to be socializing. Honestly, as a product manager, you cannot be too transparent. You cannot share too much information to your stakeholders. Nothing should ever come as a surprise to your stakeholders. And so, absolutely, as roadmaps adjust and as roadmaps change, your stakeholders should always be aware. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. The question is, what if you roll out a feature and you're not seeing the benefits that you thought you would see? And that speaks to kind of the question earlier where you really want to make sure that you have the proper analytics and metrics in place to gauge the success of a launch. And if those analytics are coming back and saying, hey, customers aren't using this feature, or customers are dropping out of the funnel at this stage, you really want to be able to either react and make it better, or in sometimes, if it gets bad enough, let's say you reallocate bandwidth to a project you think might be more successful given this new information. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
What is a good amount of time to test the metrics? Because sometimes, like, say you have like a beta launch and you have a set of experiments that you want to test. So you don't know if all of them are going to go into the final product.
Mm-hmm.
What is a good amount of time to like test those experiments? Because is it like 7 days, 14 days? Like,
yeah.
If it doesn't, should it be like a drastic change, or should it be
yeah.
like drastic results, or like what if it's
Yeah. Question is, how do you know when you've got enough data to make a decision based on post-release analytics that are coming in? And it obviously depends on the numbers. If you're a smaller company with not a lot of customers, it's going to take a while. If you're a large company, it could be very quick. I think you still want to make sure, and it also has to do with like comparables. So if you're launching a product where the comparables are a little bit fuzzier, you may want to give it a little bit longer. But if the comparables are clear, then you may know within a couple of weeks. It's just. I think you also want to be careful though not to come to conclusions too quickly. That's the one warning. Yeah.
Sorry. At what point are you bringing in your data collection teams to ensure that you are having the right metrics defined for your products to ensure that in the case where there's a financial underperformance, you can then rely on those to try to suss out what's happening?
Great question. So the question is, I've been mentioning these metrics. At what point do you bring in like an analytics team to partner with and build out those metrics to make sure that they're there when the product launches? For us, it's kind of it's definitely not the first thing you do. It's done actually later in the development stage to where you have the builds basically ready, and then the analytics team can go in and tag the proper places within the builds with the tagging that will give you those analytics and metrics and feedback. That being said, you certainly have to engage an analytics team early on to let them know, hey, this is coming. I'm going to need some resources, say in about 4 weeks or 6 weeks to do this work. So if you could just like slot that for me, I'll come back at you in a few weeks and give you the build so that you can dive in and do the work. The product manager usually should understand what exactly they're looking to extract from the metrics. So that would be the product manager's, one of the product manager's key jobs, understanding what metrics would indicate success or failure, what they want to track. And also, the metrics isn't just like a success or failure sort of read. It's also like, where are the areas within the experience that I can make bigger improvements on? And so it'll also give you an indication for where you want to focus more energy in the future, as opposed to just kill or continue a release. Sorry.
Sorry. So if you're like releasing a public product that might require like sales materials, marketing materials to go with it, even like public documentation needs to go with it. Are you like slanted that, you slating that inside the roadmap as something that needs to be done so that you can really release?
So that wouldn't be on the product roadmap. So the question was, if you're going to also be releasing a lot of like emails or flyers or media or whatever, would that also be on this roadmap? That particular thing wouldn't be on my roadmap. That would be on like a marketing roadmap or a sales and marketing roadmap. But that sales and marketing effort would come from this roadmap, right? And so they would see, hey, in Q4, we've got Snapshot coming. That's a huge feature. We're going to want to put on our roadmap, maybe in Q3, building out a Snapshot media campaign, sort of thing. And so the roadmaps would be obviously related, but I wouldn't necessarily be exposing sales and marketing effort on my product roadmap.
Unless you're a small startup.
Unless I'm a small startup, then I would probably have more teams.
Your analytics, if you were like to track success or usage or adoption, then your analytics will be off. Also, if you are, like, let's say you were going to do like a broadcasting campaign, you're not doing it.
Yeah.
So your analytics might get better after the campaign.
Yeah. I think so. We have to make sure like we're understanding like what value the roadmap brings to the company. For me, the roadmap has served as a really valuable tool of socializing what I'm doing with my product and when I'm bringing that to market. When you're talking about success of a feature, and that's when you're talking about metrics and analytics and understanding, for instance, users. And yeah, you're right. If marketing runs a giant campaign on May, that's going to impact my users when you're talking about April versus May. And so when I'm measuring success and I'm measuring the metrics, I absolutely want to account for various peripheral things that could be influencing those numbers, not just the product. And that would be like a marketing campaign. But that doesn't mean that I'm putting my marketing campaign on my product roadmap. Yep.
Do you differentiate your product pipeline and backlog from your roadmap?
Product pipeline and backlog too. Yeah. Yes. So when I'm thinking about a backlog, and again, I'm just coming from the Walmart Labs perspective here. When I'm thinking of a backlog, I'm thinking of more of a Jira story backlog that may consist of stories that feed these items or bugs that are in production right now that I need to tackle. But that level of detail wouldn't make its way to a roadmap like this. I think it's a good question. Yeah.
And here's why I'm asking. I think we do need to keep in mind that we're always going to have change requests.
Yeah.
We're always going to have the curveball. We're always going to have competition.
Yeah.
What we're committing to on the roadmap. So I'm sure you'll be talking to conference later. But I think
Might run out of time here.
separate the two.
Yeah.
Because that's the point in time. It is not a roadmap.
Exactly right. Exactly right. I mean, this is much firmer than like a Jira backlog would be, or some other thing. And don't get me wrong. I think that it's almost valuable to kind of have a running collection of ideas and things that you kind of collect as you go through the year. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to throw them on the roadmap. I think that there's a lot of consequence in having a roadmap that's too agile, if that makes sense. Okay, great questions. I think that there is one thing that is an issue with this type of roadmap. Can anybody think of like what that might be? I mean, this roadmap is great for like a quarterly release sort of thing. Can anybody think of something that they might also be interested in seeing that's not obvious?
Yeah, who's doing what?
Yeah, I think, what's that?
Who is doing what?
Yeah, exactly. I think dependencies, who's doing what. And that is where kind of this more Gantt style roadmap, I think lends a lot of value. With this, you can really see and again, don't read this, but you can kind of understand more the effort by the teams that are involved. And so if you've got a back-end development team that is going to be working on this for 3 months, that's highlighted in this roadmap and totally beneath the surface on the other roadmap. If you've got native developers that are required to work on a certain initiative from February to July, you know that the app developers are going to be tied up during that time, and you can't assign that bandwidth to other projects that require app work during that time. Doesn't mean you have to pause everything on the web, but it allows you to kind of understand how your resources are being allocated, and to what extent they're tied up. That's the value that this Gantt style roadmap brings. I think with that adds a level of kind of like complexity, though, that may be too much detail for some people. For instance, marketing probably doesn't need to know, that it's going to take the engineers 4 months to build. They just want to know when it's coming, when the customers are going to see it. So something to think about there. Any questions on this? I'm sure there are. Yeah.
Back to the visibility. Is this also on the same Confluence open?
Yep.
Okay. And
yep.
Are they integrated? So if you edit this, it edits that sort of thing, like living, or?
It depends. It depends. I think that if you're understanding, if this moves out, then obviously it could impact the other roadmap to where, if something moves out on this, then, maybe the APIs are now going to move to Q3. And so you would want to definitely have them consistent, for sure. And to your question about the Jira epics, this is where I've seen Jira epics drive a Gantt style roadmap to where you have kind of the epics kind of listed out, the start and done dates of the various Jira epics listed out, and that would kind of give you kind of that Gantt bar to say, okay, this epic's supposed to be done here. That's more where I've seen that as opposed to the quarterly release. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I was just wondering about qualitative UX research and how that plays in, before you settle on a roadmap, and then if you use that at all to see kind of the success of the
Yeah. So qualitative research?
Yeah, like UX.
Yeah. So definitely a lot of qualitative and quantitative research really that go into making roadmap decisions. I think that for us, there's a lot of qualitative decisions that will go into specifically UX aspects of a roadmap. If you're doing a site redesign or an experience redesign, being able to come up with a couple of different designs and maybe put those through a qualitative A/B or a qualitative focus group sort of studying, where you're getting voice of customer feedback about the different designs, making sure customers are kind of traversing down the journey that you're expecting them to, and things like that. And so a lot of times that would kind of be a study that would be conducted ahead of release, but not necessarily ahead of development, if that makes sense. Yeah. How do you balance what? Tech debt? Sounds like a conflict. We'll get into that. Yeah.
Another practical question. So looks like you have 4 product teams working in tandem, and each product team has their own engineering team.
Yeah.
And say you are the PM on one of these product lines.
Yeah.
And for some reason, say you are short staffed on your engineering, or say a couple of engineers leave the company.
Yeah.
And now you're going to split.
Yeah.
So again, tactically, how do you?
Yeah.
You're going to stop the engineering manager, no resources, but the other product guys are not.
Right. I think that's a common issue. And to repeat the question, every product manager owns a roadmap and is supposed to be accountable for delivering, on the roadmap. What happens if, due to turnover, a couple of engineers leave on another team, and to balance out, engineers get pulled off of your team and to support the other team, right? Or just leave. So I think that, I think that that's just a risk you need to call out. To be honest with you, it happens. Everybody knows that it does happen. There's no magic bullet there. There are strategies to kind of mitigate that risk, but consultants, things like that. But there's definitely no way to kind of avoid.
What are your options?
Yeah, the options are to either burst up bandwidth by bringing on consultants. The options would also be to bring over engineers that are like kind of underserving or not exactly needed. There also are periods on other people's roadmaps where, for instance, let's suppose a dedicated pool of engineers, full stack engineers on somebody else's roadmap, they might be doing very back-end heavy work at that point, and their front-end engineers are more flexible. Maybe bringing in some front-end engineering talent to work on what you need. So based on what the engineers are working on currently, where they're needed, hopefully the engineering team is large enough to be able to account.
Would you consider rescoping your project?
That's the third option. That's
I mean, like say, no engineering team is willing to loan you any engineers.
no, right. Yeah, I mean, something's got to give, right? It's either the timeline of the project or the scope of the work or the bandwidth that's working on it. One of those, it's one of those things has to give, and it's just a discussion with the engineering team to say, hey, can you do this? Or if not, it's a discussion with the business team to say, hey, we're not going to meet this timeline. Or it's a compromise as a product owner to say, all right, you know what, I really wanted this feature in this release. I guess I'll take it out to de-risk the project and get it out on time with the limited bandwidth that I have.
Okay.
No ideal option there.
So a related question to that would be, if there's a real conflict between two product efforts, that are owned by two different product managers, at some level do you try to have a overall kind of force ranked list of, from a company perspective,
Yeah.
what are the top initiatives?
You do.
Sometimes it just comes down to that.
You absolutely do. You absolutely do. And particularly large companies will have a list of priorities that they've all aligned on, the leadership board has aligned on to say, hey, our number one priority as a company is this. Our second priority is this. And you may have a list of 20 different priorities, right? And so where does your need or gap stack rank against those priorities? It certainly falls in. But at the same time, it's tough to pull people off of dedicated engineering teams. And so it's definitely a discussion. But you're right. I mean, all initiatives at a company are ranked. That doesn't necessarily mean that that the people at the top have a clear path to, though. Yeah.
So is it your responsibility then to do the reflection at the end of, let's say, quarter or a year or a project?
Yeah.
Reflect saying, did we meet it? Why didn't we? And just also keep that. I mean, how do you handle that?
Yeah. So that's part of agile methodology is at the end of every sprint we'll have a retrospective where the product team, the engineering team, the design team will come together and talk about what worked really well during that sprint and what didn't work really well or what could we improve on for the next sprint. So that's part of like a continuous feedback loop to help the team with the velocity. There isn't kind of a more, well, I mean, I'm sure there is, but I don't kind of abide by a more formal, longer term thing with the team. At the end of projects, we'll have, release parties and things like that, where we'll informally be like, oh, it would have been great if we could have done this or that. But there's nothing that's formally captured that could be an opportunity, to be honest with you, to say at the end of every big release, would you want to document, have a release retrospective? I think it's done more on a casual level right now for me personally. Okay. Yeah.
How do you guys internally prioritize what goes first, and how do you, in the strategy sessions, how do you decide what metrics do you use for prioritization? I mean, you could use, investment, delivery, business requirements,
Yeah.
a competitor. Well, what kind of a pattern and analysis do you guys use for doing strategic analysis to come up with priorities?
Yeah, that's basically the leadership at the company would align on those priorities based on kind of the strategic direction that they want the company to be in or the position.
Product managers, senior managers, product managers, or business, or part of the conversation? Because the business may, the leadership may want that, but at the same time, leadership may not know the initiatives that maybe sometimes have been undertaken that might yield to that result. They may not have the visibility, because the biggest problem sometimes large companies have, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing.
That's exactly right. The question is, how are those, when you've got like say 15 or 20 huge priorities at a company that are ranked, how does that ranking kind of occur? Definitely product managers, senior product managers, directors are involved in providing data to support their area. But at the end of the day, usually that priority and ranking happens above that pay grade. All right, conflicts. I think we're out of time. No. So conflicts will emerge, and I think that you're going to have a lot of conflicts. One of the set of conflicts that you'll see is kind of balancing short-term versus long-term. Short-term product iterations versus more long-term, more disruptive sort of opportunities. That's always fun. So, for instance, from my world, there could be a short-term opportunity to add a pickup scheduler component to the app refill experience. But if we do that, we're taking away potentially for something that's more disruptive, like an RX item page. That's a lot heavier lift for the developing team, but probably strategically a more powerful delivery when you're talking about becoming a center of health, knowledge, destination for customers. And so it's always a balance. And being able to, as a product manager, apply some judgment to understand we'll still be able to disrupt, we'll still be able to make an impact and be where I want to take the product in a year or two, and also do these shorter term product iterations at the same time. Because if you can't just pause the product iterations and you can't just pause long term. It's definitely a balance. It's a delicate dance. The other issue that was mentioned, tech debt, like bugs, versus specific features that are listed on a roadmap. And this is tricky because, bugs don't stop happening. Bugs will continuously find their way into a backlog, and you can't ignore them. And so, what I do as a product manager, when the bugs come in, I'm able to prioritize them on a scale of 1 to 4, so 4 different increments of priority, where I know if this is a priority 1, it needs to be tackled immediately. We need to drop everything we're doing and tackle it. If it's a priority 2, this is something that can't go on and can't persist for more than a few days. If it's a priority 3 or priority 4, there's more flexibility there. Just to give some context, I won't release a product if there's any priority 1 or priority 2 bugs in the build. Priority 3 and priority 4 bugs, I'm okay with. Priority 4 bugs are usually like UX related bugs or something like that. But yeah, P1 or P2s always need to be done before we release a new product. The problem is after you release a product, sometimes those bugs find their way back into production. And then you're talking about potentially pulling resources from a Q3 feature to work on a Q1 release production bug. And that's where things get a little bit murky, and could potentially delay or push back a roadmap. But it's just something I think as a product manager you're cognizant of. You want to try to build some buffer into the timeline to account for that. And the buffer would vary. I mean, usually a tech debt buffer could be anywhere from 10 to 30%. And that'll vary as you go through a release cycle. And then last, we kind of have been circling around it, but you've got, core product features that you want to build. But then you may have, marketing that comes and says, hey, I really want you to build like a landing page to support a campaign that I'm doing. Or optimize part of this conversion funnel that's not performing very well. And particularly at smaller companies where you're sharing an engineering pool across, marketing development and product development, sometimes that could be a conflict that needs to be aligned on between product and marketing and sales. I'm sure there's a lot of other ones that you guys want to toss out right now, right? Yeah.
Conflicts with, I mean, you mentioned earlier the CEO, say leadership,
Yeah.
someone brings in and wants something, how do you accommodate their interests as well? Or if there's a conflict there?
Yeah, I think we briefly touched on it earlier. I think if a CEO or VP comes in and they have a strong opinion that, we should add this to the roadmap, I think it's important to kind of set the context that, hey, this is a roadmap that has been aligned on and agreed on by leadership across the company, across all stakeholders, marketing, business, product engineering, UX. Everybody's aligned on this. If we want to drop this feature in and wedge it into the roadmap, we can do that. But this is the consequence. This is the sacrifice that we're going to be making to the customer by not delivering these features now that are going to get pushed back. And so I think it's always tricky when talking about, the CEO or VPs of companies and accommodating their requests, because they're usually requesting it for a very good reason. It's important that everybody involved understand the consequences of making kind of quick roadmap adjustments on the fly like that. Yep.
When we talk about the levers for prioritizing, you went over two major ones, right? It was effort, it was benefit.
Yeah.
People mentioned waiting, people mentioned those types of things. Do you guys already have, when you get into these conflict or trade-off conversations, do you have standardized levers and the weight associated with those kind of published so that everybody can vote against that baseline?
So when you say standardized levers published, what give me a couple of examples.
So let's say increased revenue will always overweigh nice customer experience.
Okay.
You can't monetize it, it's less.
Got it. Okay, got it.
So that's one for instance.
Yeah.
And of that, then revenue is more than cost savings. Potentially.
Depends on the company value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To be very honest, some companies would not do revenue over customer service. So because they look at long term, the conflict of the company value, they basically will forego the short term revenue gain. Example would be Costco, Nordstrom. They would actually give up. Speaking of experience, they would actually give up revenue.
Right.
For actually,
If they can get.
yeah.
Good.
I mean, they care for long-term customer value growth, in the long run. So that's what they.
So given that you have a variable of possibly different weights and certainly different priority, the question to you is, have you ever used a baseline for these are the levers of how we prioritize and this is the weight that we do it?
Yeah, I think what that touches on also is going back to the beginning of the presentation where you're in that collaboration stage of forming a roadmap and people are tossing around ideas and initiatives and features that could be released. You'll start to see these themes emerge. And, for instance, one of the themes might be customer growth, double our customers. Another theme might be enhance the customer experience. Not necessarily related, different themes, right? When these themes emerge, you need to, as a product manager, understand what the priority of those themes are and how they weigh against each other, for sure. And I think that having a clear point of view on that and where those themes prioritize against each other does exactly what you're kind of alluding to. Later in execution stage, as conflicts arise, you're able to lean on that previously aligned on priority weight to say, hey, we have agreed that acquiring new customers is our top priority this year, under which we'll also enhance the customer or we'll enhance the conversion, or refill experience or whatnot. I think, a second layer there is though, even though you have these priorities ranked, how much are the priorities being impacted by this initiative? And so if you're balancing one initiative that barely moves the needle on your top priority versus another initiative that makes a huge impact on your second or third priority, how does that decision made, I think, is oftentimes kind of an additional layer of complication.
little shift in direction. Some of us in the room might be aspiring product managers.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to an aspiring product manager? One, in terms of kind of navigating how to become a product manager, because that landscape is changing.
Yeah.
We see that, right? Whether we need an MBA or whether we should go to product school or none of the above, or and then what do you look for when you're looking for product managers? What qualities, characteristics, what backgrounds, as well as you're hiring for one? Can you speak to those things as well?
Sure. I mean, I think this product school thing is awesome. I looked into it a little bit when they reached out to me, and it seems like they're just doing an amazing, providing an amazing service here. Hopefully, you're learning a little bit about roadmaps this evening. But what I personally look for hasn't changed a whole lot over the last few years. I think that you typically it's important to understand what sort of product you're looking to get into. Usually you have a passion for the product, a passion for what the product is doing and how it's like improving society or bettering whatever. I don't want to be too altruistic, but usually there's a passionate area for you to serve, and you want to get into that area because at the end of the day, the product manager, the product is your life basically, and so that's why it's important to care about the product that you're managing. Other than that, there's obviously going to be a lot of product passion. I think it's very important to also have kind of a balance of appreciation for technology. You don't necessarily have to dive into code and anything. I don't code myself, but you have to have a kind of a baseline of understanding for what technical dependencies may be required to deliver certain initiatives. And that's not something that you're going to have right away, but something that you're open to learning over time. To be able to say, okay, I kind of roughly could t-shirt size this myself if I have to, knowing what I know about what we've delivered in the past. And then I think in addition to that, it's just having a passion for the customer or the user of your product and being able to really understand, what value the person's getting out of your product. Which helps you immensely prioritize when you're talking about 20 different features that you can bring to market. I think those are kind of the three things that stand out as super important. All right, so in summary, the roadmap is your vision. It's where you're going and why you're going there. It's the path forward, so it's when you nail down your roadmap, you can sleep better. You know what I mean? Because alignment is set, that priority is clear, and all the sacrifices, to your point, all the sacrifices are understood. Once you get into execution phase, if somebody comes at you with an idea, the sacrifices should be understood if everybody's aligned with that roadmap and the priorities on that roadmap. And lastly, it's important, don't overpromise things with your roadmap. Don't speculate. If things are unclear or if there's a level of effort that's unclear, just don't speculate. That's all I have to say. You want to keep it as realistic as possible, and always remember to build in a little bit of room for error and buffer for hiccups along the way if you can. But that is what I know about road mapping. Thank you very much.